Hey, welcome back to another video. We'll be painting outside again. This time we're at a more exciting location than last time. Check it out. We're by the beach. I know in my previous videos I've been complaining that it's tough to find a good location to paint at, but I realized that I've been looking for the wrong kind of thing. Places that I imagine to paint are like hillsides and rivers and waterfalls, but I've been taking like this for granted. I've lived so nearby the sea. It's only like 30 minutes away, and holy crap, I've been taking these for granted. It's so pretty out here, but it's also really hot. Yeah, so I'm gonna walk around and see if I can find a good composition or scene for me to paint. Hopefully one that's where I can paint from the shade, because it's kind of hot. Yeah. It's like 5 in the afternoon right now. I decided to come a bit earlier because I want to make sure that I have enough time to paint before the sun went down. And once the sun does go down, I'm planning to see if I can get any cool seascape sunset photography. We'll see how it goes. Don't really have a lot of experience with seascape photography. Hopefully that goes well. For now, let's focus on the painting. Hey, so I've been walking around for a bit, and I think I finally found my composition. So these rocks in the middle of the beach, I think they make for a pretty interesting subject. And also in the background you'll be able to see like these little rocky islands. I think that will help to enhance the depth of the scene. Yeah, and the color of the sand, it's orange. It's gonna contrast very well with the color of the sea and the sky. The sky is kind of blue, so I think the challenge would be to be able to separate the sky and the sea, because they're like almost the same color. But maybe I can use the rocks in the background to help set them apart. But yeah, let's get set up and start the painting.
There's always one step that I do right before I start any of my sketches, and that is to figure out just how much space the subject takes up on my sketchbook. It's easy to see the composition that I picked out if you look at the top left image here. When you're out there on location, these frames around the subject, they don't exist, and you'll have to visualize them yourself. So one of the things I will often do is to hold my sketchbook up and overlay it on top of my subject. This really helps me to pick out the composition and to get a better idea of what the proportions of these objects are within my frame or my sketchbook. However, depending on the size of your sketchbook, you might have to back up very far from your subject. So if you're using a small sketchbook like I am here, you have to sit quite far away from whatever you're planning to paint. At this stage, I've already sketched in the rocks, and they're going to be the main star of this show. And now I'm working to draw in the background, little rocky islands. I'll say that I'm taking a little more time than usual on these sketches. I think I spent a bit more than 5 minutes this time. It doesn't sound like a long time, but usually from my previous paintings, I would really rush through this process. But since this composition is a little bit more complicated with several layers, you can see the foreground. There's the foreground, there's the rocks, which are the subject, there's also the sea, and then the islands, and then the sky. So with so many components, I want to make sure that they all are drawn in at the correct proportions.
Yeah, so I just finished the sketch. The sun is starting to go down, so we're getting the lighting seems to be getting worse because since the sun's on this side, everything is going to be lit very strongly from one direction, and I'm pretty sure that the light's going to change the scene quite dramatically, especially when we get to like towards 6 or 7 p.m. So hopefully the scene stays constant for as long as possible so that I can get the painting done. But we'll see how it goes.
In this session, I wanted to challenge myself to paint a bit more detail than I'm used to. So I didn't waste any more time. After the sketch is done, I quickly just pulled out my paints and I was ready to go. I knew that at most I would have around 2 hours to work on this painting, and that's before the sun goes down or I just become too tired to work on it. 2 hours is a pretty decent chunk of time, and I have to admit at the beginning I didn't expect to use up all this 2 hours, but I actually did. This painting took me a little more than 2 hours to finish. So learning from this experience, I'm just gonna give myself even more time the next time I come out to paint. Looking back at this footage makes me realize that I just have so much stuff. I thought that my painting setup was already pretty minimal, but I look really uncomfortable, and I was really uncomfortable when I was painting this. I had to be really careful not to knock anything over, and at the same time I had to make sure that the sketchbook was in frame of my camera. So I definitely was getting some back pain halfway through working on this painting. That's enough complaining. I start out the painting by working on the sky, which is the furthest layer from where I'm sitting. That's usually the case. And then after I blocked in the sky, I quickly do the same with the sea. I used a pretty dark color for the sea, and the purpose of that was to separate it from the sky, but I lighten it as it's coming down towards the foreground, so that gives me a bit more room to play in terms of value range. Blocking in the sand part was pretty straightforward. I think it was a mixture of yellow ochre and titanium white. The main goal of the beginning phase is usually to just cover up all the white space on the sketchbook. In the beginning, it's always really tempting to paint in a lot of texture or gradients to fill out the white spaces. I learned that it's important to get all the colors onto the page as quickly as possible. That way you can have an overview of the relationships between the values of each object to one another. And from there, you can slowly begin to fine-tune the brightness or darkness of each of the objects within your scene. I'm spending a little bit more time with the block-in for the rocks in the foreground because, they're the main focal point. I use a big brush to block in all the shadowy parts of the rock. At first, the values might seem a bit harsh, but gouache always dries just a bit lighter than what it looks like when it's wet. Using a pretty similar color, I painted the little islands at the back. All of this painting footage is slightly sped up, by the way. That's why my hand looks so jittery in this footage. And now it's time for the first splash of green for the tree that's off in the top left corner. And as I said earlier, I was gonna try to paint a more detailed piece, so that's why I'm slowing down and trying to draw out more of the individual leaves. And for this, I'm using a round brush because it allows me to get a finer tip than a flat brush. I'm not trying to copy the tree one for one. I'm just trying to make sure that the shadowy patches and the light patches are roughly in the same spot. So this is the midpoint of the painting. I still have to do all of the dried leaves on the ground. I'd say it's this part of the painting where I gave myself the most freedom to create random textures and random shapes. I had to create the illusion of detail without painting each leaf individually. And how I did this was by changing up the brush strokes, changing up the value of the color. So you can see that I have like some darker and lighter browns in there. I also adjust the temperature of the browns by adding the warmer yellow ochre. And although I was painting really loose, I had to make sure that the shapes recede into the distance properly. Because due to the perspective, the shapes should get skinnier or smaller the further away it gets from the viewer. After I'm done with putting in the major shapes, I start painting in the deeper shadows. I find that these shadows are really important to ground the objects into the scene. The shadows give your objects a little bit more weight, and it also boosts the contrast. So yeah, it makes the painting a bit more pleasing to look at. I remember at this part of the painting, I was getting a little carried away and I was paying less and less attention to the actual reference, and I'm just painting according to what I knew. And here I'm using white straight from the tube to paint in these the foamy bits on the ocean waves. And during the sketching phase, I was asking myself if I wanted to draw in these overhanging branches with the dead leaves. Initially, I didn't want to do it, but the sky just felt a bit too empty, and I still had some time to spare, so why not? I used the same dark brown color that I used for the leaves, and with this round brush, I slowly paint in the branches. Notice that when I'm drawing the branches, I don't use a fully continuous line. I leave some gaps in between because I feel like this gives it a more airy feel. It's a stylistic choice that I picked up from back in my pen drawing days. We're nearing the end of the painting here. I'm starting to work on the final details, such as these leaves. It was kind of fun because I got to paint them in many different colors. Just a few final touch-ups and we're pretty much done. So here's the final piece. Let me know how you think I did.
Alright, we just finished the painting. I really hope you enjoyed the process, and yeah, just in time too, because like the sun is starting to go down now. So I'm gonna go try and enjoy some of the rest of what the evening has to offer, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye bye.